Hi, my name is John. Not too long ago, I rode my first mountain bike trail, and I fell in love with mountain biking ever since. My blog is meant to document my progress as a biker, the upgrades I do to my bike, as well as my adventures riding trails around Southern California. So, let's go! Alright guys, so the Himalo Drift 32 160mm forks. I've had these forks for about 1,300 miles or roughly 2,100 kilometers now, and as you guys have seen, I've ridden it on some varying terrain from blue trails all the way to black trails. But one thing that I constantly get in the comment section is how do I service these forks? So today, I'm actually going to show you guys how I service these forks. But as a disclaimer, I just want to let you guys know that there is no particular service manual for these. There is no particular procedure for servicing the forks. And what I'm about to show you guys is basically what I've learned in the last 1,300 miles of riding these forks, and basically the procedure that gave me the best performance. So if you guys are cool with that, let's go. Alright, so tools you're going to need for the job. Relatively standard, nothing really too fancy about it, but you're going to need some towels or napkins. You're also going to need some needle nose pliers. You're also going to need some Allen keys or hex keys, however you want to call them. Specifically, it's going to be the 6mm as well as the 2mm. You're also going to need an adjustable wrench, something that reaches about 25-26mm. You're also going to need a little hammer or mallet. Rubber is actually a little bit better. You're also going to need, of course, your shock pump. You're going to need some grease. And we're going to need some oil. Now, when it comes to the grease, there are fork grease out there that you can use. For me, I'm using just regular synthetic grease, Polylube 1000 from Park Tool. And the oil that I'm going to be using is actually just regular synthetic motor oil in 5W30 format. You can also use 5W40. The old pros, old timers actually use the 5W40s. There are fork oils that you can use, which is totally fine, but in my case, I'm using synthetic motor oil. Alright, so step one, it's relatively simple and straightforward. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to actually clean up the fork as much as you can, trying to take off as much of the dust and dirt as possible. There are a few areas that you should really pay close attention to, and that is basically the top of this cap right here, where you basically put in the air, and the other area is going to be the dust seal area. And reason being for this is because once we separate them, we don't want to get any type of oil or any type of dust or dirt into the lowers, because that can actually wreak havoc. That can actually basically screw up your stanchions, and you don't want that. But once you've done that, the next step that we're going to be doing is go ahead and open up your air fill valve cap and just set this aside, and you're going to want to remove all the air from the fork. And this is important because once we separate the lowers, you don't want the lowers basically to catapult at you and cause some serious harm. So go ahead and remove that. And then the next thing that we're going to be doing is where the air valve is at, there's basically this fitting here that contains the air valve, the Schrader valve. We're actually going to be loosening this up because we are going to be lubricating the interior air chamber. So go ahead and take your adjustable wrench and loosen this baby up. And the way to loosen it up, it's relatively simple. Just turn it counterclockwise. It is going to be a little bit tight at first, but don't be afraid, just turn it counterclockwise, you're doing okay. Just make sure that the wrench is fit on here snug, because you don't want to round out this fitting. The other thing too is just loosen it up, but don't remove it yet. Alright, so after you've loosened up the air valve fitting with the Schrader valve, just leave it there for now. Like I stated, we're not going to be removing that yet. we're actually going to start undoing some of the bolts on the bottom of the lowers. First bolt that we're going to be removing is going to be the air spring side, and that's relatively easy to remove. All you got to do is just take your 6mm Allen and turn it counterclockwise. And just leave that on for now. The other thing, after we've done that, we're actually going to move over towards the damper side with the red knob here, damper adjustment. And basically, we're going to be removing that as well too. And it's kind of difficult to show you guys, but in the middle of the adjustment valve is actually this 2mm Allen screw or bolt. And so all we're going to be doing is basically take your 2mm Allen, fit it on there, turn it counterclockwise, and take this all the way off. Alright, so once you've removed that, go ahead and just set this aside. Place it somewhere where you're not going to lose it. And once you remove that, this valve actually comes out pretty easily, or this adjustment knob. Go ahead and just set that aside for now. The next thing is, once we've removed the adjustment knob, you guys are going to notice it looks just like this right here. There's going to be this red bolt that basically bolts on the damper onto the lowers. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be removing this, and caution is that this particular metal is a little bit soft, so what you really want to do is make sure that you adjust your adjustable wrench and make sure that it is on tight before removing it. And to remove it, all you got to do is just put on your adjustable wrench, make sure it is on tight, and we're going to turn it counterclockwise as well. So you guys might get to a point where you're turning it counterclockwise, but yet the nozzle or the knob, whatever, is turning with it. The best way to do that, or to alleviate it, is basically put on the red, knob, hold it with your pliers, and then turn. This way it keeps it all in place, and then from there you're able to remove it and loosen it up. Alright, and once you've removed that, go ahead and just set this aside. And the next thing that we're going to be looking out for is there is actually going to be an O-ring that sits on this little thread here, and you're going to want to carefully try to remove that as much as possible. Like I stated, be careful with it because you could actually mess this O-ring up, and then it's going to be hellacious. You're going to be stuck in your tracks. But go ahead and try to remove it now if you can. So go ahead and remove that, and then what we're going to do is just set it aside. Alright, so once you've removed that, go ahead and just set it aside. Don't lose it because it's pretty important. So the next part, since we've taken that off, go ahead and just remove the rest of the that 6mm bolt on the air piston side. Once you remove that, go ahead and just set this aside as well. Alright, so at this point in time, we are going to partially separate the lowers. And basically, we're going to get it to a point where this little nipple or this little fitting is actually in the lowers, and there's just a hole there. If this is going to be your first time servicing this, you don't really have to worry because it's a thick black grease that they use in here. So when you actually separate them, there's going to be no oil that's coming out. For me, since I've used oil, I changed it to an oil bath. I am going to have some oil that's going to leak out, but for you guys, you don't have to worry. first time you actually do this, this might actually be stuck. The lowers might be stuck over to the uppers. And if that is the case, all you have to do, take your little mallet, your rubber mallet or whatever, have that on hand, go ahead and lock your shocks, the dampener, and then we're going to put back the little knob here, the nozzle, and then just give this a few good thuds, and it kind of helps release it. There you go. Put that back on the side, and now it's time to separate this. And there you go. You want to get it to a point that's just like this right here. Like I stated, if this is the first time that you guys are doing this, there's going to be no oil that's going to be coming out. For me, there is going to be oil. So have a rag or something, you know, on hand to catch that oil. For me, I'm just going to use a rag. And I'm actually going to do it pretty much one way at a time. Alright, so I got the oil out. And now, or at least as much of it out as possible. Now what we're going to do is we're going to separate the lowers from the uppers. And the way to do that is just gently pull it off. And like I stated, gently. There you go. They are now separated. Alright, so now that we've gotten the uppers separated from the lowers, the next step that we're going to be doing is actually just general cleaning. So, in order to do that, just grab a rag or whatever, and what we'll do is we'll actually start with the uppers first, and go ahead and just wipe down the stanchions. Make sure you try to get as much of the old grease off as possible. As you guys can see, mine is relatively clean since I did just service this about 20 miles ago. But go ahead and try to get as much of the old grease off as much as possible. And if this is the first time that you guys are doing this, you guys, like I stated, will notice there's going to be a nice thick black grease that's on there. After you've done that, we are then going to move over to the lower legs. And same thing. Basically, we're just going to clean it. We should have cleaned the outside pretty well, but now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be focusing pretty much on the interior of this. And the way to do that, if you guys can't see it, but inside, these are the legs of the lower walls, right? In there, there's going to be some thick black grease. That same thick black grease that they use. And the way to really clean it, just take a towel or a paper towel or something, stick it in there, right? And then you're going to be taking a stick of some sorts, which I forgot to mention in the tools that you guys are going to need. Take a stick of some sorts, and then just push the paper towel in there, right? And then what you're going to do is take that same stick. In my case, I'm using basically an old, what is this, housing for, I think it was a derailleur. And then from there, just basically push out that same towel that we just pushed in. And you're just going to want to rinse and repeat this for however long it takes to, you know, try to get out as much of the old grease as possible. When you guys do this procedure, just be sure and be safe to try not to scratch up the interiors of the lower walls. That way it doesn't cause any damage and you continue to have nice, smooth stanchions. But yeah, continue this. Like I said, do this as many times as it's possible to remove all of that grease. You can also use paper towel that's soaked in alcohol to help loosen it up if you guys would like, and do this for both legs of the lower. Alright guys, so now that we have done that, we've cleaned both sides of the lower legs. We're going to set the lower legs aside for now, and we're going to focus on basically the uppers. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on the air spring section and not really the damper, because there's really not much servicing that we can do with the damper since these are sealed cartridge units, and normally once these go bad, you just remove it, replace it. You could buy the part on AliExpress. I believe the Suntour 32 millimeter stanchion dampeners will work with this. But go ahead and set this the lowers aside, and let's focus on the uppers. All right, so when it comes to the uppers, of course you have two sides, right? You got your air spring side, which we kind of loosened the cap up a little bit earlier, and you also got the damper side, which is on the right side. So what we're going to be doing is we're actually going to be taking apart the air spring side to basically clean and lubricate the piston as well as the shaft. So in order to do that, we've already loosened up the top cap at the top of the air spring, but at the bottom there's actually a threaded bolt here which holds the air shaft in place. So go ahead and take your adjustable wrench, and what we're going to be doing is we're just going to be removing this. Make sure that the adjustable wrench is nice on and snug, and turn it counterclockwise to loosen it up. It's loosened up. Go ahead and remove this. Alright, this will let you basically remove the air spring shaft, but we're going to set this aside for now. Go ahead and remove that top cap that we basically loosened up earlier before we took it apart. Alright, once you've removed that, go ahead and just set this aside for now. So we've removed the shaft, right? There is still one more piece inside of the stanchion, and that is actually a piston. It's a metal piston. It's red in color, and that is basically, it connects to the top here, and we need to remove that as well too. If this is the first time you guys are doing this, you guys are not going to have any oil in there. For me, since this isn't my first time, I do have oil in there. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to basically let the oil drain out. And the purpose of the oil is to help that piston lubricate as it travels up and down the shaft. So we're going to let the oil drain out, and it's just a small amount of oil. After the oil has drained out, the next step, you're going to take that little stick of yours again, that stick, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to actually be pushing out the that piston. I like to push out from the bottom. You guys can push out however way you guys want, but just be careful. Might be a little bit rough at first, but don't be afraid. Just gently push it out. It gets a little bit rough when it gets through, the edges and stuff. Like I said, just be patient and just push it out. All right, we got it off, guys. So after you push this out, it's gonna look like this right here. It's basically a piston. The way it works is this right here, the green part, actually faces upwards, right, like that. And then this right here is the shaft, which sits like that, and it goes up and down this stanchion, depending upon the compression and everything like that. So once we've gotten that removed, next step is we're going to actually just gently clean this, wipe it down, and get it ready to be re-greased and reinserted. So take your towel, so to take this apart, basically you have this right here, which is a little spacer. Go ahead and just remove that, set it aside, and then that should free up the shaft itself. Shaft is made up of that, basically that little fitting at the bottom here. We also got this little looks like a rubber type dampener of some sorts, and then right here is actually your negative spring. So this negative spring, its function is basically it counteracts the forces of the air spring, and so it keeps it in place and things like that. Softens it up a little bit more too. But anyways, we're going to basically start off with these two pieces. Go ahead and just clean it up, wipe it down, take off all of the old grease as much as possible. Once you've done that, go ahead and just set these aside. because we're going to be greasing it up again a little bit later. Like I stated, for you guys are going to see basically that thick black grease that they use from the factory. Alright, so here it is right here. All you got to do is just, this one comes off rather easily. Go ahead and just wipe that down. And then set it aside. And then here, this is the air spring right here, right? To take this off, it's relatively easy. Just pull. Go ahead and just wipe out the air spring, right? Set it aside, and then clean up the shaft. Wipe down the shaft, take off all of that old grease. Alright. So that is taken apart. Go ahead and take that red piston. Also wipe that down and clean it up, removing as much of the old grease as possible if there's any in there. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to clean up the interior of the stanchion. The way to do that, similar to the lowers, just take a rag, take a paper towel or something, and basically just stick it in there. Take your small little stick, fish it out to the end. Do this however many times it's needed to try to remove the old grease. Alright guys, so now that we've cleaned up the parts of the air spring, the shaft, the piston, and so forth, the next thing that we're going to be doing is we're actually going to be putting it back together again, and we're going to grease it up. So taking the air shaft here, just take a little bit of grease. Alright, we're going to put it on there just a little bit, you don't need a whole lot, and then just smear it on just like that. And then after that, take the negative spring and then just pop this back into place. It will be hard at first, I'm not gonna lie. It's easier, it comes off a lot easier than it is to put it on, but just push it on there and it should be okay. And then after that, we're going to take this part right here, the other orange nylon thing, and we're going to apply a little bit of grease there too. Basically we're greasing up like the mating surfaces, you know. You don't need a whole lot, because sometimes when you actually have too much, it could affect the dampening and so forth. Go ahead and stick that back on. And then we're going to take that rubber piece that we took off earlier. You're going to want to grease this area here and grease this area here as well too. These are the mating surfaces, and then we're going to put that back on after you've done that. And then the bottom portion of the stanchion. Then go ahead and take the bottom portion of the stanchion, which we got right here, apply some grease here as well too. Sorry, my hands are like really dirty, it's really oily. But you know what, when you ride bikes, it gets dirty. Don't need a heavy layer, but just put it on there, just like that, and go ahead and slide this back on. Alright, and while we're at it, we're also going to add this back on. Go ahead and just grease this, grease the tip here, and then just put this back on so we don't forget. You could put it on a little bit later, but I have this bad habit of you know, installing everything and then leaving this off, and it doesn't work properly. So now that the shaft is fully assembled, let's move on to the piston itself. We've cleaned this up. The next thing we're going to be doing is we're just going to grease it up. And just apply a small amount of grease. Make sure you grease up that O-ring and the white portion, the white nylon thing. What you're going to want to do once you grease that, just apply a little bit of grease in here too. And again, it's not, you don't need a whole lot. This is basically, we're just greasing up the mating surfaces. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be reinserting actually that piston back into the stanchion. But before we do that, you can take a little bit of grease, right, or just maybe a little dab of grease. Oh, running out of grease here. little dab of grease, just about that much right there. And we're going to be putting the grease basically on here. There we go. This will aid in insertion. Alright. Alright, so once you've done that, let's take our piston. We're going to be inserting this back in there. Green goes upwards, the white goes downwards. Go ahead and just insert that. It might be a little bit tough at first, but just be gentle, you know. There you go. Once you normally get past the threads, it becomes a little bit easier. And once it's in there, we're good. At this point, let's take this back in, or let's take the shaft, and we're gonna put the shaft back in as well too. Go ahead and tighten this nut. That locks this all into place, at least from the bottom. Thread it in, hand tight at first, and then take your adjustable wrench and tighten this up. Like I said before, make sure it's nice and snug before you turn. There we go. Perfect. So we got that part taken care of. Next part that we're going to be doing is we're going to be focusing at the top here. And the way to do this is we're actually going to inject oil before we close it up. So at this point in time, we're going to take our syringe and we're going to drop 5 mLs of oil. If you guys don't have a syringe, you guys can actually use a teaspoon. 1 teaspoon is equal to 5 mLs of oil. 1 tablespoon is 15 mLs of oil. So we're just using 1 teaspoon, since we don't want too much oil in there, but we just want enough to the point where it'll lubricate it. Alright, so we drew up the oil. It's a little bit of an air bubble, that's fine. All you gotta do, inject it in there. Bam. And like I stated, this helps lubricate that piston as it travels up and down the stanchion. Makes it work way smoother. After you've done that, this should be cleaned, as we cleaned it out earlier. This should be relatively clean as well too. Go ahead and take the top fitting and thread it back into place and tighten it. Alright guys, so now that the uppers are done, we're going to switch our attention back over to the lowers. Now previously we've cleaned it up, we've taken our towel, we've stuffed it in there numerous times to take out as much of the old grease as possible. So the next thing that we're going to be doing is actually we're going to be re-greasing it, re-greasing the lowers. And the way to do that is basically just taking your stick, right? I like to put about 1 teaspoonful of grease, you know, in there, and then I just take the stick to basically gently spread it around the upper half of the stanchions. So go ahead and do that. Just take your grease. Remember, like I said, it's about 1 teaspoon. You don't need a whole lot, and actually too much will be detrimental to performance. But once you put it in there, go ahead and just start spreading it in there. You only need it really on the first half, you know, because at the bottom it's going to be oil. Go ahead and do this for both sides of the lowers. Alright, now that we've done it on both sides of the lowers, what you're going to be wanting to do is, just for a little bit of extra grease, we're going to just put a little bit more grease actually in the insertion site, the opening, and basically just take this much. It doesn't need to be a whole lot, but all you got to do is just spread it around here, and this will help ensure that it, you know, it goes in there smoothly. Right, make sure to get it on the inner area of the dust seals, and go ahead and do that for both sides. So now that that is done, let's take actually the uppers. And what we're going to do now is we're actually going to apply a nice thin coating of grease on the bottom half of the uppers. of the stanchions. And it doesn't have to be, like I said, a huge amount of grease. It's just a small amount. Go ahead and do that for both sides. Alright guys, so just to recap, we have cleaned the lowers, we've re-greased it, we've also greased the stanchions, we've also oiled and greased the interior of the piston, the air piston, and we've applied a light coating of grease onto the stanchions. The next thing that we're going to be doing is we're actually pretty much ready to join these two pieces together. So to do that, just take the lowers and just gently, what you want to do is just gently slide them back into place. And like I said, gently, don't want to be too rough with these. Take your time. They are greased, so you know, friction is not going to be too much of an issue, but go ahead and slide these two pieces back into place. So when sliding it back into place, you have to look. Sometimes the damper rod actually gets stuck, so you know, just be aware of that. You might have to fish it out or whatever. As like in my case, it is stuck. Basically, it's hitting the lower leg, but now we got it out. So there you go. So now that that part, basically the lowers are back on with the uppers, you actually, we got it at this point right here, right, where the damper bolt actually sticks out. You don't want that yet. So go ahead and make sure that dampener is back in the housing. And the next thing that we're actually going to be doing, let me clear some of this up, is that we are going to be injecting 15 mLs of oil into the lowers. So go ahead and take your syringe or your teaspoon or whatever and draw up 15 mLs. Alright, once you've gotten the 15 mLs drawn up, this might be hard to see, but the hole, go ahead and just inject it through the hole here for both legs, left and right. And basically this acts as lubrication, which keeps it nice and buttery smooth. You're going to want to do this for both sides, like I stated, for the right and the left. So after you've injected the oil, next step that we're going to be doing is we are going to be pushing it, the lowers back in further so that, ooh, everything's just dropping here. Yeah, so we're going to be pushing the lowers back further so that the damper rod is sticking back out. And at this point in time, we're going to take that O-ring and put that O-ring back on. Sorry, my hands are like super dirty, guys. This is a dirty job, lots of oil. You get grease and all that good stuff, but trust me, it's worth it. You can always wash it all off, you know. Alright, so we got the O-ring. If you can't get it on all the way, that's totally fine. Like in this case, I only got it up to the top portion. We're going to take the bolt next, and we're going to basically start threading this in, and this bolt actually helps push the O-ring down. And there you go. Once you get to this part, after you've snugged it down, go ahead and take your adjustable wrench, which I dropped somewhere. Here we go. And we're going to tighten this up. Basically, we're just going to, you know, same steps as earlier, make sure it's nice and snug. You don't want to mess it up, but tighten that up as much as you can. And if that thing is spinning as you're tightening, take your pliers, your needle nose pliers, to hold that into place. Right, hold it into place while you tighten it up. So after you've tightened that up, go ahead and take the valve, the knob, put that back on, and then you're going to take that screw that we removed that fixates fixates that the valve knob onto the actual damper, and you're going to tighten that as well too. Now for these, like I stated before, there are no specifications for this. There's no torque specifications. So what I do is I just do it good and tight. Then the next thing, after you've done that, it's time to actually work on the other side. And a lot of times what I realize, all the times I've done this, is the shaft, the air spring shaft is somewhere here, you know, and the hole is here, right? So we need the air spring shaft to be actually onto the hole so that we can use that bolt to lock it into place. So the way to do that, just take your handy dandy air shock pump, attach it on there, and we are going to put a small amount of air in until basically that shaft is hitting, you know, is flush against the lower hole. And nice way to know that, you know, you've got it there. Sometimes you'll hear like a small little thud, right? But I like actually to put this here, the bolt, and then once it's there, that bolt basically shoots out. So right now I'm just adding in small amounts of air to help push that piston down, and I'm not going to be overdoing the air. I'm not putting in a whole lot, you know, I'm waiting for that piston to basically, you know, basically go down so that I can actually thread it in properly. There you go. So now that is good. So we got basically that shaft to be close enough to where we could actually thread the bolt back on. And once you are able to do that, go ahead and tighten that bolt as much as possible using your Allen keys, 6 millimeters. Most likely you'll get to a point where every time you spin it, you're not able to really, you know, add more. You're not really able to spin it even anymore without it spinning. So at this point in time, what you want to do is just add a little bit more air, usually about like 50 psi. And this will help kind of add pressure onto that shaft with the lower because of the air pressing down on it, and then you'll be able to like spin it a little bit more. Perfect. All right, so now that everything is pretty much tight, we still got about 50 psi into the air. Next thing you want to do is kind of help you know, cycle it a little bit, right? Clean this up, cycle it a little bit by pressing on it down manually, and it helps the oil basically get in there and helps lubricate it. The other thing too that you can do is basically just kind of help, you know, flip it upside down like that, and then after that cycle it through by, you know, pressing down on the stanchions and stuff like that, so it helps that oil kind of get into, you know, the walls and helps lubricate it even more. But after you've done that, we are pretty much done. Go ahead and clean up your forks, add in your sag that you need, set in your settings and so forth, and finally obviously take it for a ride. I would actually take it a little bit easy probably for the next few miles, maybe 5 miles or so, just to, you know, just to make sure that everything is okay and all that lubrication, all that grease is working properly. But anyways, that pretty much concludes the video. Hopefully you guys found this video helpful. Again, this is how I set up and how I service my shocks. And I've done this for the last 1,300 miles on the Himalo Drift 32s. And I also do it too on my other cheaper forks, such as the ZTZ, Kashimas, and things like that. But anyways, like I said, hopefully you guys found this video helpful. And until the next adventure, take care, be safe, and peace out.